Yo, sup squad, welcome on into the channel. My name is Kyle Meshna and I'm a landscape photographer and filmmaker based here in San Francisco, California. If you're just joining us, what I do is I teach you how to use a camera and the things that are related to it. So if that's something you're into, consider subscribing or just watch another video of mine if you happen to like this one. Today I got a fun one for you. I don't know if you know this, but it's summer months, therefore it is Milky Way season. My favorite type of season, probably because it's in the summer and the summer is just objectively better than any other time of the year. The days are longer, it's warmer, and at night, the Milky Way is out and about if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. If you're in the Southern Hemisphere, I actually don't know when the Milky Way is out. I'll figure that out. And with it being Milky Way season, I figured now would be a good time to teach you guys how to shoot the Milky Way. I recently posted a Milky Way shot that I took a few weeks back on my Instagram, and everybody was asking me, how'd you get that shot? So here we are. This is gonna be a two-part series. This first part is going to be how to shoot the Milky Way. Second part is going to be how to edit the Milky Way. So stay tuned, let's get into it. All right, first things first, let's talk about what it is you need gear-wise for the Milky Way. Unlike some other parts of photography, there is some very specific gear that you do need. Namely, you will need a tripod, a wide and fast aperture lens, a headlamp, some warm clothes, because it's gonna be cold out, it's gonna be dark, and you'll probably need something like the Photopills app. I believe it's about $10 on the iOS and Android store. Totally worth it. I also talked about planning in normal landscape photography in a previous episode, which I'll link above, where I talked about Photopills. It is an invaluable resource for all landscape photography and pretty much absolutely needed for Milky Way photography. Optional, you can use something like a remote trigger. I use these for making these YouTube videos, but also for making sure that you don't have any camera shake. This is gonna be one where you're going to want to make sure that your tripod is very steady and eliminating camera shake, and any small movements that you would make from pressing the shutter is gonna be important for that. So that's what you need from a gear standpoint. All right, now I also already said kind of general summer months are the best times for Milky Way. It'll pretty much last from around March until October, but the really kind of key months are April and beyond. Another thing for timing that you need to pay attention to is the phases of the moon. A full moon is going to be way too bright to see the brightest stars. So you're gonna look for somewhere near a new moon, nearish to the new moon, either true new moon or within a few days on either side. As I mentioned, you can do this with the Photopills app. You can go ahead and enter the moon setting. You'll see the calendar by day for when the moon is rising, setting, and you'll notice within there, you will see when the galactic core rises and sets as well. Okay, so let's jump out into the field and check out how to photograph the Milky Way. So here we are out photographing the Milky Way. It's beautiful out here, as you can see. It's actually super dark, and we're actually not in the field photographing the Milky Way. We're still in the studio because, for one, it's kind of hard to video out in the pitch darkness, and you're gonna wanna be in the pitch darkness to photograph the Milky Way, because the darker it is around you, the more that it becomes obvious where the Milky Way is, and you get a lot less light pollution. So you should check out something like the Dark Skies map to determine where it is you want to photograph the Milky Way. I would highly recommend the darkest place possible that still has some interesting foreground. So let's first talk about composition. The key to composition, like any landscape photography, is to not just have the Milky Way up in the sky. I mean, that's totally fine if you want to just get a blank Milky Way shot to perhaps use later. Maybe you want to sky swap it like I do all the time. But really, you want to create a interesting composition regardless of whether or not the Milky Way is there. The Milky Way, like a nice kind of clouded sunset, is really just there to complement the image. So you want to still find a nice foreground area. What I highly recommend doing is scouting out the area beforehand for two reasons. One, it's really hard to find your way in the dark. You should be kind of mapping out exactly where you want to be ahead of time, and you want to determine using Photopills where the Milky Way is going to be as well. So it'll generally be from southeast to southwest, in somewhere in that direction. But with the Photopills app, you can always use the night AR mode to kind of wave it around and determine, okay, at around 3 a.m., the Milky Way is gonna be over this nice rock, or it's gonna be behind this nice little curve in the road, as we did with this image. All right, so now you have your location and your composition all kind of teed up. The next thing that people have questions with and have struggles with is focusing. There are a few different ways that you can go ahead and focus for the Milky Way. The first is during the day, you can go ahead and focus on something far away and then tape your focus ring into place. This is probably gonna be my least preferred way, but it is something that a lot of folks do. Second thing you can do is use a light or a headlamp or have a friend run out into the field or the rock area or wherever it is, as long as it's safe. You have your friend go out there, they hold up a light and you focus on that light. This is especially helpful for focusing on the foreground. So if you have your rock or your bridge or your whatever it is, you have your friend stand in that area, you focus on them. Now you know that that part is in focus. The third thing that you can do, and my preferred method, is to focus on one bright star. Typically, when you're looking at the Milky Way, to the left of the galactic core, there is one particular bright star that is always there because it's the brightest star right there. So I always try to use a very fine spot focus and focus directly on that one. Typically for me, this works, but play around with it in the field and make sure that you do have your focus. Fire off a couple of test shots, make sure it's in focus before you really plan everything out and move forward. All right, so you're composed, you're focused, you're ready to now move on to the settings. Now, if you're still a little bit uncomfortable with using manual settings on a DSLR or mirrorless camera, I do have a previous video on overcoming the fear of manual mode. I will link to it somewhere right up here. All right, so settings for the Milky Way are quite important, and there's a couple of rules to keep in mind to help things out. First is the rule of 500. The rule of 500 states that you take 500 and divide it by your full frame equivalent focal length, and that is now your shutter speed. So on a full frame camera using a 24mm lens, you take 500 and divide it by 24, and you get 20 seconds, roughly. We're gonna round to 20 seconds. This changes slightly if you're using a crop sensor camera. So if you're using a crop sensor camera, you take that focal length, multiply it by 1.5, that you then now do 500 divided by that new number, and that is your shutter speed. So if you're using a 16mm lens, you multiply that by 1.5, then divide that from 500, and you get, again, 20 seconds. Okay, shutter speed out of the way. Next thing is aperture. Basically, you're gonna want the widest open aperture that your lens can get. So use your widest open lens that you can use. Because it is so dark, you wanna let in as much light as possible. So 2.8, 3.5, or ideally something like 1.4 to allow in the most light possible. Obviously, things get pretty expensive as they get towards 1.4, but pick your lens that is the fastest. So that pretty much leaves you with ISO. ISO is basically the only thing that you can change. I would recommend starting at around 2000. Yes, 2000 I know sounds astronomically high. Start at 2000, fire off a test shot, see if it looks good. If not, you can always increase it up to around 6400. Honestly, it entirely depends on how good your camera is at handling low light. All right, and there you have it for the settings. Now go ahead and start popping off a bunch of shots. I mean, it's not gonna be popping them off like, I mean, it's gonna take a while, right? Like every 2 shots is gonna take at least a minute. I recommend taking as many photos from the same exact position as possible. This will come in handy later if you do decide to do something called exposure stacking. We can get into that in the post-processing section, which will be another video. But for now, you got your settings down, you got your ways to find the Milky Way in the night sky, you got your ways to plan it. So get out there and try to shoot the Milky Way. Socially distant, of course. So guys, if you did like this video, I'd be happy to tell you that I make videos like this pretty often. So go ahead and watch a different one. Let me know what you think. Subscribe if that's something you're into. Play thumb war with the like button, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.